In a story that apparently is surprising everyone except for Chael Sonnen, because he had talked about this on his podcast before the announcement was made, Nik Lentz will be fighting BJ Penn. They haven't decided on the date or venue yet, as far as I know, but they have announced that that fight is going to happen. The reason why I mentioned that Chael Sonnen was on it is he was saying that this is a storyline that's been happening for a while, where Nik Lentz, at one point in his career early on, was brought in as a training partner for BJ Penn. And for whatever reason, Nik Lentz wasn't happy with the experience. I think he may have gotten cut, and after just having one sparring session, that was it for him or something along those lines. But just the main idea being that he wasn't happy with how BJ had treated him as a guy who had flown out to Hawaii to help out BJ. So this is a fight where he'd been calling for it for a while, even before BJ Penn was kind of the sad case that he is now. While it at least looked like he still had a chance to beat some relevant fighters, this was a fight that Lentz was calling for. So I guess they finally decided to make it. Now, granted, Dana White had just said not too long ago that this was going to be it for BJ after that most recent loss to Clay Guida, but apparently maybe he just feels that there's a good enough storyline here where it's worth making the fight. I don't know what the case is. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, I guess. Maybe he figured with BJ getting in trouble with the law, fighting with a bouncer, it's like, hey, him and Nik Lentz might fight each other anyway. Let's just put it in the cage instead of getting BJ to put in jail for it. I just don't understand what the reasoning was for it, but if this is the fight that's happening, so be it. So I'm just going to look at the records in the UFC of both guys and talk about how I think this fight's going to go down. I think, like most people, I expect Nik Lentz to win this fight. I don't know whether Lentz is just going to tear right through him or whether it might be competitive for some short areas. I know in the most recent fight for BJ Penn against Clay Guida, he actually looked pretty good in the first round. It was surprising how good he looked in the first round. But then he got tired and just didn't look too good in the last two rounds and obviously lost that fight. So for Nik Lentz, just looking at his record in the UFC, and again, just a little background, Nik Lentz, he got into MMA after winning a Minnesota high school state title. He was a wrestler on the University of Minnesota team, but I don't believe that he wrestled with them for long. I think he got his high school state title in 2003 and started MMA in 2005. But even still, just to win a state title in high school and then to wrestle on the team, that's a pretty good thing. And he's known for his wrestling. So his UFC debut goes all the way back to 2009 against Rafael Oliveira. Won that fight. Actually had a pretty good start here. So his first six fights in the UFC, he went 5-0-1. So beat Oliveira, uh, had a draw with Thiago Tavares, beat Rob Emerson, beat Andre Winter, beat Tyson Griffin by split decision, beat Waylon Lowe, had a no contest with Charles Oliveira, who surprisingly he's had three fights against in his career, but then lost to Mark Bocek, lost to Evan Dunham, beat Iji Mitsuoka, beat Diego the Gun Nunes, who at one point looked like he would be a UFC title contender, but that never really worked out for him. Beat Hakron Diaz, lost a decision to Chad Mendez, beat Manny Gambarian, took a little over a year off, then fought Charles Oliveira for the second time and got submitted. Beat Danny Castillo, beat Michael McBride, lost to Islam Makhachev in 2017, beat Will Brooks, lost to David Tamer, beat Gray Maynard, beat Scott Holtzman. That's actually a pretty impressive win to beat Scott Holtzman this year. And then lost to Charles Oliveira in their third fight. So he's heading into this fight against BJ, where depending on how you want to frame it, you could say he's 2-2 in the last four. You could say he's 2-1 in his last three. But not exactly on a skid at all. Granted, he did lose his last fight to Oliveira, but it's not like he's showing that he's not a legit contender in the UFC anymore. He clearly is a UFC caliber fighter, and getting a win over Scott Holtzman this year proves that. Is BJ Penn still a UFC caliber fighter at this point in his career? That's a little bit more questionable. Geez, there's a lot of red on here. So let's just look back at his record. See where the UFC begins, because he kind of had some breaks. Oh, so his first fight was in the UFC. So he beat Joey Gilbert, beat Dean Thomas, beat Caol Uno. And I think it's worth going through these old fights with BJ Penn just to put some context on how good he used to be. I know it's been a long time since he's won. And if you're a recent MMA fan, you probably don't even know what a lot of people are talking about when they say that BJ Penn was one of the great fighters of all time. So it's worth looking at some of the wins that he had and what sort of built up that legacy for him as one of the greats before he got on this really long skid. But again, had that one over Caol Uno, which was an 11-second knockout. Lost to Jens Pulver by majority decision. Beat Paul Creighton. Beat Matt Serra, a future UFC welterweight champ. Had a draw with Caol Uno. Beat Takanori Gomi. Beat Matt Hughes, who was a welterweight champ for the UFC. Beat Dwayne Ludwig, now a famous coach. Beat Rodrigo Gracie. Fought Lyoto Machida. So again, this is a lightweight fighting a future 205-pound champion. beat Renzo Gracie, lost to GSP by split decision, lost to Matt Hughes by TKO, beat Jens Pulver, so he got that loss back, beat Joe Stevenson, beat Sean Shirk, lost to GSP, beat Kenny Florian, beat Diego Sanchez. And really here, this win over Diego Sanchez was one of his best looking wins. And from here is when it started to go downhill. So he had that fight in Abu Dhabi against Frankie Edgar, lost a close decision. I'd say it was like 3 rounds to 2. Then they had a rematch because it was a close fight, and Edgar dominated that one. It was pretty clear that Edgar won that fight. So thinking, okay, well, Frankie Edgar's got his number, but maybe he's still elite. Comes back, fights Matt Hughes, knocks him out in 21 seconds. So, okay, good sign. Then he takes another fight at welterweight against John Fitch. And, oh my goodness. Wow. So I didn't even realize this. I just looked at the date. That Matt Hughes win, which was his last win, was on November 20th of 2010. So what's crazy to me is I actually started training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in January of 2011. So that means that there's never been a time when I've actually trained Jiu-Jitsu or MMA or anything, any other martial art where BJ Penn has won a fight. That is, boy, that's a long time. Wow. 2010. Whew, that's rough. So yeah, that kind of took me off guard there. But anyway, the John Fitch fight, that was a majority draw. But then that's when the skid started. So he lost to Nick Diaz. I think he actually might have won the first round, but then Diaz, obviously known for his cardio, was able to put it on him late. Rory McDonald, just huge size differential there, and obviously we know how good Rory is. Had another fight with Frankie Edgar about a year and a half later in 2014. That fight was really bad for him. Took a while off and decided to come back in January of 2017. So about 2.5 year break between the Edgar fight and then the return against Jair Rodriguez. That was a really bad fight for him. Just got dominated. Rodriguez won that fight. Fought Dennis Seaver, lost a majority decision. Fought Ryan Hall, got heel hooked pretty quickly. And then had that fight with Clay Guida that we were just talking about where he was doing pretty well in the first round, but then just couldn't carry it through and ended up losing. So as far as BJ Penn goes, should he be fighting anymore? No, obviously not. It was good to at least like see him look pretty he looked competent for a little while there against Clay Guida. Like his boxing looked okay. He was sort of pushing him up against the fence, wasn't able to get a takedown, but it's not that you expected him to get a takedown. Obviously, with this fight with Nik Lentz, you don't think he's going to get a takedown here either. On the feet, it's plausible that BJ Penn might outstrike him at least in the first round. I don't know that he'll have the energy to keep that up over 3 rounds, but he might have a decent looking first round if Nik Lentz decides to take him down. BJ, he's got a decent guard. It's not like he's very offensive off his back. He's not like Charles Oliveira, where Oliveira is constantly hunting for submissions. BJ is a little bit more position oriented, which is fairly normal. So it's not like if Nik Lentz takes him down, that BJ is going to wrap him up and submit him really quick. And you wouldn't figure that BJ is going to get top position either. So as far as how the first round goes, I think it's possible that BJ, at least for the first couple of minutes, might actually like start off doing pretty well and maybe even be winning the first couple of minutes. But his gas tank probably isn't going to be great. He's never been known to train the hardest. I don't see him training super hard for this fight either. So to me, this is just going to be a fight where he's going to get ground out by Nik Lentz. Lentz may take some damage that's unexpected by some people. I think some people think this is just going to be a wash and Lentz is just going to run right through him. But even if BJ looks good at the start of the fight, I don't see him doing enough to finish it. And once the clock kind of moves along and it goes from 1 minute in, 2 minutes in, 3 minutes in, 4 minutes in, BJ's just going to start fading. And at that point, Lentz is either just going to pour it on the feet or he may just take him down and just kind of conservatively ground and pound him for the remainder of the fight. So if I don't know what the betting line's going to be on this, I'm sure Lentz is going to be a big favorite. I don't really see the point in putting any money down on BJ Penn, even if he is going to be good enough to win a couple minutes of this fight. I think Nik Lentz is going to win the whole thing. So it's a shame they're making this fight. I think it'll be a little bit more interesting than most people expect, but it's not a fight that I need to see. If it's just a personal thing between the two of them, like it's okay to sign a waiver, go into the gym and just duke it out there. We don't need to see this on a UFC card. I get Dana White's standpoint on it where he's like, hey, there actually is a storyline here. And in a lot of cases and with a lot of fights, there just aren't storylines. It's just like, yeah, we matched up these two guys because they're both good. Now go watch them fight. So at least in this case, there's a bit of a grudge match going, but I just don't feel like I need to see it. So I don't know. Hopefully BJ doesn't get hurt too bad, and maybe once this grudge match is out of the way, Dana will really mean it when he says that this is it for BJ Penn. But if this is the fight they're making, it's the fight they're making. Hopefully no one gets hurt too bad.